Good morning, and thank you all for joining. I hope everyone can hear me. And a few minutes ago, we did ask as you join, if you're have joined via the web, if you could go ahead and put your name and organization in the chat box, and we're going to get started now. And those of you that have joined us again from December, we hope we don't have we don't foresee the same technical difficulties today. So thanks for coming back for a second try. First, I'd like to welcome everybody, and my name is Lisa Castaldo. I'm the coordinator of the Governor's Office of Volunteer Services, and also have my colleague Cecily Means with us today. She's going to be doing a portion of the presentation. She is the Senior AmeriCorps Program Officer here at the state. We do want to take questions. I think the best way may be to go and put them in the chat box as we go. That way other folks can see the questions. They may be having the same question, and we'll stop periodically and answer them as we go along. And please, if you've called by phone using your telephone, please mute your telephone and don't place on hold, or we will hear your music. Real quickly before we get started and kind of do a deeper dive into what AmeriCorps state program is and the grant application that's currently open, wanted to give you all a little information about our office, which is the Alabama Governor's Office of Volunteer Services. We were established, we are established through executive order, and we also serve as the State Service Commission. As we move through this presentation, you'll see how that really is what enables us to be the lead agency for AmeriCorps State in Alabama. We have been the State Service Commission for over 20 years and under several administrations. And in 2017, Governor Ivey issued a new executive order, number 709, which did rename the office, formerly Serve Alabama, to the Governor's Office of Volunteer Services, and it authorized the office to continue to serve as the State Service Commission. We do report to the Director of the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, and we're actually located now. We've moved physical locations to the Center for Commerce in Montgomery, if any of you are familiar with that building. We have really two primary functions. We talk about kind of two sides of the office, but they complement each other and work together very well. The first one is, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about this part of the office, but it's a really important part of what we do. We're very involved in disaster preparedness. I should actually have disaster preparedness response and recovery work up there. Our office is the volunteer and donations coordination for the state of Alabama Emergency Operations Plan, and also we have a principal staff person, Brooke Mills, who serves as a state voluntary agency liaison. And what that means in a nutshell is when there's a large disaster and the state is activated, we play the part of the volunteer and donations coordination. Typically, that means really working with the unaffiliated volunteers. Those are the folks that show up after disasters and want to help. And we work with local emergency management and local voluntary agencies to put in systems in place to manage those folks. And then we also work, and this really occurs after very large disasters, large donations that come into the state that need to be warehoused and then distributed accordingly out to the affected communities. So that's a role we've had since 2004, and we've worked through several large disasters in Alabama, and we kind of stand on the ready if the need arises again. And as the state voluntary agency liaison, we're the state agency that is that bridge between state government and nonprofit organizations, and mainly nonprofit organizations that have a role in disaster response and recovery. And this is an ongoing job that we do. We work with the voluntary agencies organizations active in disaster, serve as ex officio on their board, and are constantly either in an exercising, planning, and then going back and planning some more mode so that we're always sure we're at the ready for the next event. Another role that we've played in two more recent disasters, the 2011 tornado outbreak, and again in 2014 for a smaller flooding and tornado event, is the lead agency for FEMA's disaster case management program. And this is a new program that FEMA's rolled out in the last, well, I guess not that new anymore, about 6 years. It was a pilot program prior to that, and it allows the state to access funding to put paid case managers in the field to help disaster survivors coordinate their recovery efforts. And the last piece is the Ready Alabama campaign. This has been an ongoing initiative since 2004, and it really kind of mirrors the Ready.gov campaign that FEMA manages at the federal level, and it's a multimedia public preparedness campaign. So it's looked like a lot of different things over the years, and kind of can be nimble and really respond to whatever the needs are at the time. So we talk about different types of weather events based on the time of year. Of course, right now we'd be talking about winter weather, and we've also done different things. Public service announcements, billboards, large public awareness events, and also we've now really have a social media presence with Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for Ready Alabama. And then the part that kind of pertains to why you all have joined today is our role as the Alabama State Service Commission. With this designation, which is a federal designation, we that the governor has assigned to this office, we manage the Alabama AmeriCorps State Program, which is an annual grant competition, and we manage the competition and then also manage the portfolio of programs once they're awarded. There is an actual State Service Commission, which is made up of 15 to 25 members appointed by the governor, and they're the folks that have oversight and advisory capacity over the office, and particularly the AmeriCorps program. The other piece as the State Service Commission that we're responsible for is the compilation of a 3-year state service plan. We do this, we're actually about to release the 2018 to 2020 plan, and this is put together with a group of stakeholders over about a 12-month period, and it is kind of a global snapshot of volunteerism in the state, where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, and how particularly us as the State Service Commission and other partners can move the field forward of volunteer and service in Alabama. Oops. Okay. Real quickly, the kind of give you an idea of where AmeriCorps comes from. The federal agency that oversees the program, and also the federal agency that we report to as the grantee as the state, is the Corporation for National and Community Service. And you'll see there are 4 distinct programs under the AmeriCorps umbrella, and the one that we're going to be talking about today is the one highlighted in blue, which is AmeriCorps State and National. You may also be familiar with VISTA. Some of you may know AmeriCorps, we call it NCCC, the National Civilian Community Corps, and there more recently has been the addition of FEMA Corps, which is a partnership between the Corporation for National and Community Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Other programs that the corporation oversees are Senior Corps and the Volunteer Generation Fund. So now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about AmeriCorps State. And to kind of give you a big snapshot of it, and this is actually a little bit dated now, this number, it's even bigger. But since 1994, more than 980,000 Americans have served, and we actually crossed the million member mark last year, giving over 1 billion hours of service and earning more than 3 billion in education scholarships, or we refer to them more commonly as education awards, and we're going to talk more in depth about what those are a little later in the presentation. And again, this was from last year, but on October 7th, the 1 millionth AmeriCorps member was sworn in with the class last fall. So we've crossed there over 1 million alum now out in the country that have served in AmeriCorps. And kind of in a big snapshot, AmeriCorps, and you'll see it referred to as state and national. We're specifically talking about the state competition here, but these two go hand in hand. And it supports a wide range of local service programs that engage thousands of Americans in intensive community service each year. Grants are awarded to a network of local and national organizations and agencies committed to using national service to address critical community needs. And these include, but aren't limited to, which is sometimes what makes AmeriCorps a little confusing, can be education, public safety, health, the environment, disaster services, child well-being. There are programs now being launched around the opioid epidemic. So you can kind of fill in the blank there with, if your community has a need, how can AmeriCorps address it? Each of these organizations and agencies in turn use their AmeriCorps funding to recruit, place, and supervise AmeriCorps members nationwide. And this is where we really want to stress, this is a human capital program. It's not what you more traditionally think of when you're writing a grant for a program where you would be including a lot of operating funds. This is really about get member slots, and getting kind of that human force behind the activities that your organization is engaged in. AmeriCorps state and national programs, which we'll call member positions, are open to U.S. citizens, nationals, or lawful permanent resident aliens age 17 and older, and members, and we're going to go into more detail about different types of member slots, but members can serve full-time, part-time, or quarter-time over a period not to exceed 12 months. And the slot type is completely based on your program design. You have a lot of flexibility there. Full-time AmeriCorps state and national members are given a living allowance, which we'll talk about stipend. And I apologize if I go back and forth, but we often refer to the living allowance as a stipend, so you'll see those words used interchangeably when you're reading about AmeriCorps. And this is only full-time members are given a living allowance, health care, and child care assistance if they qualify, and they become eligible for Siegel AmeriCorps Education Awards upon successful completion of their program. Less than full-time members typically still do receive a prorated living allowance and also a prorated education award. And again, in exchange for their service, and this is definitely one of the big benefits of being an AmeriCorps member, and just add here that we refer to members as doing service, and that they're AmeriCorps members. They're different from what we think of as a community volunteer. And so your organization may already do a lot of volunteer engagement. This is a more formalized relationship that you have with this individual. They do have a contract for their service, and they're committing to X number of hours depending on the type of slots that you would have in your program. So it's somewhere in between employee and volunteer. So just to kind of distinguish between those things. The AmeriCorps members do earn an education award that can be used to pay for additional higher education or to pay back qualified student loans. And also these education awards are not reflected in your grant budgets, nor are they reflected in our budgets here at the state. When you enroll a member, they automatically become eligible for this award that is managed at the federal level in a trust. So it's a very nice perk that they have. And administratively, it is no extra work for you all as programs, and we don't actually deal with it at all at the state. Since 1994, more than 7,000 Alabama residents have served more than 11 million hours and have qualified for Siegel AmeriCorps Education Awards. This is an amazing number to me, over $21 million, which many of them then put directly back into our institutions of higher ed. So it's fabulous. So in 16-17, which is the last year that we have of full reporting for AmeriCorps, we had more than 410 members serving in Alabama, and they're doing results-driven service. And when we get to Cecily's portion of the presentation, she's going to talk a lot about performance measures. But again, in Alabama, we really are focused, our programs tend to be focused heavily on education. We have one in the portfolio that focuses on environment. We have some health care, economic opportunity, and some that are doing some other things. But like I said earlier, that need is really driven by what you have determined is that need in your community, or what your organization's mission already is that you're working towards. Most AmeriCorps grant funding in Alabama does come through our office, which is Governor's Office of Volunteer Service. It's a state commission, which in turn is awarded every summer to nonprofit groups. It can be local, county, or state agencies. So local municipalities are eligible to apply. We have a city and several school systems who are current grantees. The remainder of the AmeriCorps state national grant funding is distributed directly by the Corporation for National and Community Service to multi-state and national organizations through a different competitive grant process. And so typically, which we're going to just talk about the formula, AmeriCorps, Alabama AmeriCorps State formula application today. That one is for agencies that are typically, not always, but typically only operating in one state. And that is why really state service commissions are there to serve single state organizations. Your bigger organizations that are working in multiple states, they can go directly to the corporation for an AmeriCorps grant. Some choose to still go to state commissions. So if your agency does have sites in multiple states, you're not precluded from our state formula competition, but do know that you do have the opportunity to go directly to the corporation for a grant. Then other individuals who serve in AmeriCorps Vista, and these are individuals that work at eradication of poverty is the primary focus of AmeriCorps Vista. It always has. It's a much older program than AmeriCorps State and National, and these are full-time members and working in all different kinds of issue areas, fighting illiteracy, improving health services. They can work on capacity building, housing, and then there's also the NCCC program we talked about, and that's a 10-month full-time residential program. If you're interested after this presentation in either Vista or NCCC, we'd be happy to get you the contact information for those programs. So real quickly, how the money flows down. So Congress does an annual, well, they don't do an annual budget anymore, but in theory they do an annual budget and make an appropriation, and that appropriation goes to the Corporation for National Community Service as a federal agency. They're part of the federal budget, and then as a state agency and the State Service Commission, we receive what we call a formula allocation that we then compete out for AmeriCorps State. Currently, we have 7 subgrantees in the state of Alabama, and while that's a small number, when you think about a statewide grant program, each one of those represents many service sites. So we have grantees that have 16, 17, 18 what we call service sites or partner sites across the state. So it's a very much of a kind of a spider web effect of this program as far as the reach goes in the state. All right, so now I'm going to try to get over and real quick we want to talk through the timeline so you guys can see. Okay. All right. So what I'm getting an echo. That's weird. Okay. Okay. That went away. All right, hopefully y'all can still hear me. So what I just did is I went to www.servealabama.gov, and we will post this presentation after we're done today, so you can click back through. But I went to our website, and then I clicked on AmeriCorps on funding opportunities, and there's a list of documents. And the one that I went to is called the Alabama AmeriCorps State Grant 1819 Application Timeline. And what the column I want you to focus on is the one all the way to the right, which has formula applicants at the top. That competitive and education award only column, just disregard that now. We're past that, and that tends to be programs that are already in our state portfolio that we put forward in a national competition. So today, if you're on the call and interested in an application this year, you need to focus on that formula applicant timeline. So you'll see we have what we call the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The application instructions and additional state instructions were released back on October 1st. There is a letter of intent that is due on January 30th of now this year, 2018, and I'll go back over and show you exactly how these things are listed on our website. But and then in early February, we've also asked for the Theory of Change worksheet if you're a new applicant, evidence-based worksheet if you're new and if you're a recompeting applicant, and the performance measure worksheet for new applicants. So It's a lot of things due before the actual application is due in eGrants, which is the federal grant system that you have to apply in, that we work with, that's due in mid-March. But we found over the years that getting these pieces in beforehand really gives us the opportunity to work with you, and they're key to a strong application. So it just helps you really put together the best application you can for that March 15th deadline. We are not precluded from providing technical assistance as needed. We're available to come on site. I know we've already been out to several organizations through the late fall to talk to them about applications and AmeriCorps, and just kind of get their team around the table and see if it's a good fit for them. We really encourage that, actually, if you'd like that. Or we can do it over the phone. We can have an individual conference call, whatever works best for you all. But like I said, some states are, by their state law, precluded from having those type of conversations. We're not, and we want your application to be as strong as it can be, because they're all put together and as a state portfolio, and so we want the portfolio to be as strong as possible. So to say that, call, email, and we're happy to work with you through this process. You'll see in red on the bottom of this timeline. Oh, well, let me finish the timeline real quick. So March 15th, your application is due in eGrants, and there's we'll go back out, but you can see where all of the links are for all of where you get to eGrants and all of that kind of stuff. But then once your application comes in mid-March, we convene peer, staff, and program committee review. The program committee is actually made up of state service commissioners. They're a subset of the full commission, and they'll start to look at the new applications and the continuations, and they're the ones that are going to actually put together the final recommendations to the full board, not the staff. But we do advise them and provide them pertinent information and help them with the review. Your grants are scored with a standardized scoring tool. So there's a standard format for all grant reviews, and it absolutely follows the application. So my advice whenever I talk about writing any grant is to read early and read often. Print stuff out, get out your highlighter, get out your little sticky notes, and follow the instructions to a T. If it flows, you don't want your especially the peer and program committee reviews. Staff members, we tend to be able to read with a bit of a different eye, because if you're jumping around, we still can follow it because we understand the program so intimately. But when you have a peer reviewer or a program committee reviewer, which is commissioner, if they start to feel lost in your application, it's not following the scoring tool which follows the application, that's when you tend to really get a lot of hits on the scoring. So anyway, that's kind of just a little aside there. Then the program committee meets in late April, and they'll put together their final recommendations. At that point, we'd be coming back to some of you for additional clarification. So even though you made that submission, and that submission is non-negotiable on March 15th, that's the hardest date on this timeline. If you miss that, we don't have the authority as staff to allow your grant to come in and move forward. But if it's received, we will probably more than likely be coming back to you in late April and early May to do additional work or clarifications based on the feedback of the peer, staff, and program committee reviews. And so in early June, the commission meets and they make their formal vote on the package for it would be the 18-19 program year. And then we may come back one more time. So they may decide that they love your project, but they want you to start a little smaller, or, whatever. And so there's usually a little bit of final tweaking there. We submit the package to the feds in late June, and they typically get back to us. And we go ahead, and I have awards announced. We typically go ahead right after the package is submitted. We give a tentative award so that folks can start planning, but your formal contracts go out usually in late July and early August. program startups can be either September 1 or October 1, and that's entirely based on applicants' choice. It's going to depend. Our school systems typically like to start a little bit earlier because even September 1, many of them, they've already been in school 3 weeks. So that gives you a little bit of flexibility with your startup. And if you're a brand new program, if you're listening and you're putting an application, you're successful, we really recommend, and we'll work a lot more with you as the process evolves, but you're going to want to build in some startup time that first year. So even if you have a September 1 or October 1 start, you probably wouldn't be bringing members on until maybe November 1st or November 15th, but we work with you on that. Okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Cecily. The other thing I did want to mention before we went off this timeline is on the bottom, we added this to that technical, and like I've said, we are happy to provide technical assistance. We love it. We hate when we see an application come in for that March 15th deadline that's not even reviewable because the instructions haven't been followed or whatever, and we would have been able to help mitigate that prior to that date, but we can't after. So, however, we ask that technical assistance will close 2 weeks prior to the grant application. So that's going to be early March. The reason for this is kind of for all parties involved. If you're starting your application with a 2-week window, all you have left, it's just, we feel very strongly it's not going to be a successful application. We would encourage you to probably work towards the next year, and we would be happy to work with you on that. And it just, I think, it kind of forces everybody to work on a more realistic timeline, and we can't guarantee our availability that close to the deadline. So we hate to say we're available, and then you call and we're like, well, we're in DC for 3 days in meetings, we won't be able to get back to you. So we just feel like for everyone's sake, it's best to go ahead and close that out. Does that mean you can't ask a very simple, quick technical question about something? Absolutely not. But the kind of technical assistance we're talking about is coming out to your site, really reading your drafts. We're happy to read the drafts of your narratives even beforehand. We just cannot provide that within 2 weeks of the March 15th deadline. Okay. Okay, real quick before we go off that. So I've gone back out, I closed out the timeline, and you can see this is back on our website. This is Serve Alabama website, servealabama.gov, and I've clicked onto funding opportunity, and then this is all of the relevant documents for 1819, and we're going to go back out and talk a little more specifically about a few of them, but you can see everything you need is on here. The timeline we just discussed in detail. There's that letter of intent I mentioned that's due at the end of this month. There's a template you fill out. You don't need to, come up with anything on your own. And it is kind of a little walkthrough, asking some pertinent questions that may kind of drive your thinking about the size of your program, number of members. It's going to ask you some things that we're going to get in a little more detail about member service year costs, those type of things. So I encourage you to do this immediately if you're even thinking about the program, because it may be the thing that makes your decision for you when you start to do that letter of intent. There's a readiness assessment that we have new programs fill out, and then there's a grant application checklist and submission instructions for additional documents. eGrants is the federal grants application system that you're going to be using. As a state service commission, we have some additional documents that we need, and we do not have the ability to ask for those in the eGrants system. So there is a little bit of work you're going to do outside of eGrants. The 2018 Notice of Federal Funding Opportunity, this is what I said, print it out, get your highlighter out, get everything you need to know about AmeriCorps in your application is in this. It's kind of a little bit of a misnomer. The application instructions are really about how to use eGrants. So it's going to talk you through setting up, if you're not already an eGrants user, how to set up your account. And that is something that you can do this afternoon. You don't have to wait until you start your application. You don't have to wait you can go ahead and get the application started and not put any content into it. You can go back to it and back to it. And also, as you build your application, build everything in an alternate format. So write your narrative in Word. You may want to work on your budget in Excel, whatever you're comfortable with doing. Don't build it in eGrants. It's notorious for shutting down, having little issues. It's an old system. They're actually looking to replace it in the next probably year to 2 years. So it's a little bit of a patchwork system, but so don't trust it with your only version of your grant. You'll have a very unhappy day. There's some 2018, this is mandatory supplemental guidance. This is a Corporation for National Community Service document. It's got some definitions in there, so definitely take a look through that. The 2018 performance measure instructions, I'm not going to really get into that. Cecily's going to talk about this some more. Again, it's a huge document, so don't be scared by it. You'll find your section that's applicable to you within it. So when you pull it up, and I think it was 130 pages. I think they 98, yeah, they shortened it a little bit this year, but it's still just so long. But only small pieces of it will actually apply to you once you've narrow down what you're going to be working on as far as your performance measures. There's also a logic model sample. You do have to do a logic model. So there's a sample that you can use just to, walk you through. So I did mention that there's some supplemental documents. These are the additional documents that you would be sending that will not show up in eGrants. The theory of change worksheet, the evidence-based checklist, the performance measure worksheet. There is a fiscal assessment, new programs, and also something that we've designed for that we call a program diagram, and it also kind of helps you really in a visual way kind of work out how your program is going to look. So again, if you have questions about any of these, please lay these next to the timeline because some of them are due prior to that March 15th deadline. If you have any questions after this presentation, we'll be happy to discuss them with you individually. So now let's go back. Okay, I pulled out a few pieces that are important. And again, this does not eliminate reading those documents in their entirety. There's really no other way to put together a thorough application. But these are some particularly important points we wanted to make sure we made today. And I'll check my time. Okay. So in the notice of funding opportunity, there is what we refer to as an MSY, which is member service year. And this is a really important number when you're thinking about developing an AmeriCorps application. Your member service year, your MSY, is how you determine the number of members you're going to have and how much you can ask for in federal dollars, so the federal part of your budget. And let me just say, today is not going to go into a whole lot of detail about budget development. If you decide you want to move forward with an application, we generally like to have applicants have a one-on-one conversation with our senior staff accountant, just because we found in group questions with budgets are so specific and so individual based on your program and your organization that it kind of starts to really muddy the waters for the group. So, but these are some things that are consistent across applications and are honestly just non-negotiable based on the federal NOFO. So one MSY would equal one full-time AmeriCorps member. One MSY would also equal 2 half-time AmeriCorps members, and one MSY would equal 4 quarter-time AmeriCorps members. Or you can mix it up. Like I said earlier, you may say one MSY, oh, I want to split that and say, I'm going to have 1 half-time, which would be a 0.5 member, and 2 quarter times, 0.25 members to equal the 1. However you want to equal the 1. The 1 is important. The 1 MSY is important because there's a federal cap on what you can ask for each MSY. So this year, and it changes every year, so this year it's $14,932. So This does not include, there's also a grantee share, which we'll talk about in a minute, but this is just the federal dollar request part of your budget, the first column of your budget. Um, so to be very easy math, so say you say, I want all full-time members and I want 10 of them, so you're asking for 10 MSY, that would mean that the federal share of your budget cannot exceed $100,049, or no, 149,320. So that, and that is a hard and fast number. You cannot go above it. And so you'll start to see as you build out your budget that you're really locked in on that federal request based on how many members you determine you're going to need, utilize, and the types of slots you're going to select. So another really important thing that I think we talked about a little bit in the introduction about this, that there is the Siegel Education Award, which all AmeriCorps members are eligible for when they complete their term of service. And I did already say this is not a number that you look to put in your budget, and it's not a set aside that we have to do here at the state. They're actually, once your member is enrolled, and there's a national, we call it a portal, there's a national system that you enroll your member in once they're selected, that automatically, based on the type of term that they're doing, whether it's full-time, half-time, quarter-time, it's going to do a set-aside in the trust for them. It's going to assume that they're going to complete and be successful, and so that's there for them when they do that at the end of their term, and they're given, and we provide all of the instructions, how they go about accessing their education award post-service. Now, if they quit during the year, they're not eligible for their award. There are circumstances which we call personal compelling circumstances, which are very rare, where a member might need to leave for military service, critically ill, the primary caretaker of a critically ill family member. It's very limited things that would allow for this, but where they would receive a prorated education award. But again, those are limited. Typically members, they don't complete for whatever reason. It's not, the program's not a good fit for them. Some of them go on and find jobs. They're not able to complete. They do not receive their education award. Now, AmeriCorps members can serve up to 4 terms, but they're only eligible to receive 2 education awards. You may say, well, why would they want to keep serving after that? But they do. We have lots of programs that members have served the full, that because this changed when the law was reauthorized in 2009, and we do have member programs where members do want to serve up to those 4 terms. What we do typically see with our more seasoned programs, when they have repeat members, they tend to modify that position description a little bit. So you want to make sure folks are getting a little more responsibility, a little bit different experience beyond that first year. But again, that's a presentation for another day when we get into member management. I mentioned real briefly match. So we talked about the federal side of your budget being limited by that member service year number, that $14,000 number. There is a match requirement for this grant. So as a brand new applicant in the first 3, and let me just mention, this is an annual grant competition. However, you're only a new applicant once. And so you would come in as a new applicant in year 1, and then we look at the project time as 36 months. So year 2 and 3, you would be a continuation. Then year 4, you would start what we would call a recompete if you came back to apply again. We have lots of programs that have been in the portfolio now for over 20 years. And so what I've found since I've been with this office since 2004 is that when it's a good fit, it's a really good fit. Sometimes organizations come in and they do struggle a little bit, and we work with them as hard as we can, and sometimes it's just kind of an amicable parting of ways. But when it clicks, it tends to really work. And so again, we've had programs that have been in now for 20 years, and AmeriCorps State is only 23 years old. So I think that speaks really highly of the program. Of course, I say that you're never guaranteed funding. You have to perform. You have to be, you're meeting your performance measures. You're filling your slots. You're being compliant with all the federal rules. So there's a lot to being successful. But like I said, once an agency gets in and it starts working, it tends to work really well. So back to match. The first 3 years of your grant, you are required to provide a 24% match. Now, this can be a cash or in-kind match, but let me just caution you that when you look at what you're limited to on the federal side with that MSY cap, and you start to build in all the costs associated with the program, I think it would be very difficult to not bring some cash to the table in your 24%. Now, some of your 24% may be support services that your agency would be providing to the program that you're going to capture that are like real things, some accounting services from your accounting department, maybe your HR department, if you're big enough, it depends on your organization, is going to assist with when you're onboarding members or doing some of the training for members. So there's creative ways, and again, this is where I think it's much more beneficial that if you think you do want to move forward, to schedule a call with us and the accountant, and she can talk through, real specifics of developing that budget. And then you'll see if you continue, it does cap at 10 years. So if a program is an AmeriCorps program for 10 years, they cap at 50% for their match, and that's it. It doesn't go higher than that. Okay, just a few other notes. Again, these are just some highlights. This isn't inclusive of everything in those documents, but to just kind of some words of caution. E-grants, so what'll happen is it'll get printed out of e-grants, and there is a page limit that's in it, and all of this is in the application instructions, and then it's in the NOFO. And again, what I mentioned earlier, prepare your sections outside of e-grants, because oftentimes, then put it in grants and print it out. Sometimes it'll play with your page limitation in there. So it can be a little bit different from what you're seeing in your Word document to eGrants. So just double check yourself. The application review criteria, again, this is in the NOFO. It shows the point value for each section of the grant and how the reviewers will score the application. They use this at the federal level. We use the same exact model at the state level. So it's no mystery. You can see what sections are weighted more than others. So I would, advise maybe those are the ones you spend a little more time on. So, and again, they'll be reviewed using a standard scoring rubric by the staff, peer, and commission program committee. So, real quick evaluations, and this one actually, if you are moving forward and you have questions about evaluation, this is something we probably discuss also just independently with you. It's going to be based on what kind of program you're implementing, whether it's one that's brand new or there's already a lot of research around it. So I'm not going to go into detail on that piece. And this is one because I'm going to run out of time. The National Service Criminal History Check. This is, again, something that's mentioned in the NOFO. This is something that we as staff would work very closely with your organization through the summer, if you're awarded, to help you kind of get off on the right foot with this. This is a critical piece of running an AmeriCorps program. When the law was reauthorized, as I mentioned in 2000, it was in 2008, signed in 2009. This became kind of a really seminal piece of the legislation, and it's unfortunately quite a complicated piece, but we help you with it. It's a multi-step process to make sure that your AmeriCorps members and your staff who are working on the AmeriCorps project are properly checked in the National Sex Offender website, and then also a state and FBI background check are conducted. So again, it's for the safety of the beneficiaries of your programs. Many of you may already have background check policies in place. And so we would look at yours and then try to determine, how we align what you're already doing with the AmeriCorps rules. And as far as the corporation's concerned, this is a non-negotiable 100% right all of the time, even for new programs. And so we do spend a lot of time on this with our programs, and we would be working very closely with you to help you complete this properly. So application instructions. The application instructions conform to the corporate, and I already mentioned this, application instructions, the NOFO is going to have all of the detail about the building your application and how the application scored. The application instructions are going to walk you through how to use eGrants. And there's also some worksheet for developing your budget. And then please be aware there's separate instructions in there for new versus a recompete and continuation application. If you have never applied or have never successfully applied before, you are new. So if you're a recompete or a continuation, we already know who you are. So I'm assuming most people on the phone today would be new. This is the grant application checklist that Cecily has very nicely put together. Please use it. We hope it's helpful. And as you go through any of this stuff, it's so much information, and we really have worked really hard over the past few years to try to put it together in a way that makes the most sense. But if you have any comments or feedback about it, or ease or lack of ease of using any of these documents, let us know. The only thing that we cannot change is eGrants, but a lot of the other things we do have some ability to change. So budget development, I kind of already talked about this quickly, and I want to keep going because I want her to have time for performance measures. I've said this multiple times. Please reach out for individual technical assistance for all application development, but particularly budget development. Your budget is going to be strictly driven on your number of MSYs, which is going to be your number and types of members. So once you determine that, and that letter of intent is going to help you figure that out, then your budget will start to flow from there. The one thing that we do ask that is included in your budget, and this can be either on your federal side or your match side, is to include $1,500 for in-state meetings and events. We tend to try to host a couple of things a year for program staff, and this year, actually, now it's 2018, we're looking to hopefully have a statewide member event maybe in the late fall. So that would, if you were a successful applicant, that would include your members. So that's what that money is there for. And then be detailed in your information in your budget to ensure that budget totals are clearly indicated and appropriate. And remember, kind of a rule of thumb for federal grants, and this is a federal grant, even though it comes through the state, these are federal dollars and they never lose their federal identity, is that dollars are reasonable, allowable, and allocable. So you want your budget to be easily tied back to your narrative and what you're doing in your program. So to say that when people ask, well, is this allowable? Is this not allowable? And our answer is kind of, it depends. It depends on what your program design is. One time we had a disaster response crew, so chainsaws were perfectly appropriate in their budget. Our programs that are in kindergarten through third grade, not so much. So, it really is a case-by-case basis, but it needs to make sense, be reasonable, allowable, and allocable based on your program design. Speaking of program design, so AmeriCorps is really meant to enhance a sound program model that may be already there. And where we see the most success is if there's a program that's already running, there's already some structure to it, but you want to grow it. You want to either geographically grow it, be able to add more beneficiaries, however that looks. AmeriCorps members can be that engine that does that. So they do not supplant staff, so you need to think about that. So it's not that you're adding administrative staff to your organization, and they need to be supervised. So you wouldn't necessarily want to just throw them out there doing some complex program implementation. It may be that you have a staff member who's already out there implementing a program, and they could use 3 or 4 folks to really expand that reach. That would look like an AmeriCorps member. Excuse me. So, and then one other thing to think about, I don't know if any of you would fall into this, is the idea of an intermediary model. And so we do have one organization in the state that falls into this category. And so they've identified a way that they are the host organization for a large number of members, and then there's organizations within their footprint, and they've kind of determined who that partner would be. Does the partner align with their mission? Does it expand their work? Does it make sense? And they've determined that, and then they are able to place members in smaller numbers within those partner organization. So an intermediary model is something that we're very interested in. If you think that's something you could possibly be a host for or interested in, give us a call and we would love to talk about it some more. It's a little bit more complex than being a single host organization with all of your members serving in-house, but it's a great way to get members out in the community. Okay, real quick, programs. Okay, some things that you're going to be providing, member service agreements, grievance, and again, this kind of bleeds into member management. So, and I'm going to go over. So programs must provide member service agreements, grievance procedures, outcome measurements, branding, site supervision, and attend CNCS and our state trainings. There's quarterly progress reports, monitoring compliance reviews, and responding. Periodically, we have conference calls with our programs, and then you do submit monthly expense reports. And one thing I do want to mention on budget is this is a reimbursement grant. So there is the expectation that you are able to get the program started with existing resources, and then you are reimbursed on a monthly basis. And once that process gets rolling, it tends to go fairly quickly, but there is a slight delay. Obviously, getting you're going to be expending some dollars before you receive some grant dollars. So just know that up front. And again, that's something we could talk about in more detail on a budget call. And then there's some closeout reports. I'm actually going to go through. Oh, let me go. Okay, some other things real quick. Programs must have and expectations. I'm not going to read these to you. We'll post this so you can look through them because I'm going to turn it over now to Cecily. Let her talk about performance measures.
Good morning, everyone. Please forgive me if I sound a little congested or if I start to cough. I'm battling a cold. But let's go ahead and get started and talk about performance measures. I'm going to go through these probably a little quickly so we can make sure that we get the time in. And if you've got questions, by all means, reach out and ask those questions. First, CNCS uses performance measures to tell the story of the collective impact of national service programs. And they do this in two ways. Through their national performance measures and through their applicant-determined measures. Essentially, the national performance measures reflect the CNCS strategic plan and programming priorities. And they do this because it allows them to essentially speak the same language across all of the programs that are across the entire country and the U.S. territories. It just makes it a little easier for them. And then the second one, the applicant determined measures for outputs and outcomes. These are intended for programs whose interventions, outputs, or outcomes don't fit under the national performance measures. And it's just as it says, you're creating the measures, but you still need to follow the same rules that the national performance measures outline. Performance measures are ongoing systematic processes of tracking your programs, excuse me, tracking your program or project outputs and outcomes. Every program must have at least one aligned performance measure, and that's an output plus an outcome for your primary intervention. Outputs are the amount of service provided, that's people served, products created, or programs developed, and outcomes are changes or benefits that occur. And I just want to say this real quick. You can have additional performance measures for other significant components of your program, but CNCS values the quality of performance measures more than the quantity. So start out small, and if you see there are more things that you think will be beneficial to measure, that's fine, but it's really better to have 5 versus 15 or 20. An output is a type of measure that tabulates, calculates, or records the actual product or service. It's delivered by a program, such as students receiving tutoring or houses built. An example for that, for the national performance measures, is the number of individuals that received CNCS-supported services in disaster preparedness. Essentially, outputs will answer the question of how much service did we perform and what products did we develop. Also with outputs, these are going to be your denominator. So it's basically a figure that is representing a total population. So the outcome, which we'll talk about next, those targets should be less than the outputs. Outcome is a type of measure that indicates progress toward achieving the intended result of a program. which usually represents a change in the situation of beneficiaries of service, such as educational achievement or housing. It can reflect changes in individuals, organizations, communities, or the environment. And it should address changes in attitudes, beliefs, knowledge and skills, behavior, or condition. This is just a visual for you. Outcomes regarding attitude and belief will involve a change in thought or feeling. Outcomes measuring knowledge and skill will involve a change in understanding or ability, and this is essentially what a person learns. Those addressing behavior will involve changes in actions such as conduct or habits, often in a specific context. And lastly, outcomes regarding condition involve a change in situation or circumstance. And here's just an example from education. As you can see, the attitude belief is an increased interest in school, and behavior is increased school attendance. That could also be a decrease in disciplinary referrals. So it's just basically what you're measuring. Go to the next one. Here's another one with healthy futures. Okay. A knowledge and skill here is improved low budget cooking skills. Um, Behavior change is increased healthy food intake, and condition is improved household food security. And just to touch on the importance of alignment, your measures have got to make logical sense. And I know that seems like it might be obvious, but sometimes it can be a little difficult as you're trying to work it out. But just make sure that it follows a logical order. Like if you'll see the blue boxes at the bottom, it talks about first the community problem and need, and that can be young veterans have high rates of unemployment. And you think to yourself, okay, so what will be the intervention, job training and placement services? This will also be your output. And then your effect, which is going to be the intended outcome, will be veterans find or are placed in jobs. Here's one of the national performance measures, and it's just an example, number of economically disadvantaged students or students with special or exceptional needs who start in a CNCS supported education program. And your original target will be 100. And those from that same 100, you will choose something less than that 100 because you have to account for attrition and other things. So it will never be the same target for your output and your outcome. Go back. So that the 60 will be your number of students with improved academic performance in literacy and or math. Another example of a national performance measure here for Healthy Futures, your output is the number of clients participating in health education programs, and there you have 415, and then your outcome being only those clients that show 20% improvement. And again, that target will be smaller than the 415, so there it is 300, and that's also an applicant determined measure. That is not a national performance measure. So just some best practices for your performance measure. I can't stress this enough. Read the National Performance Measure instructions. And if you've got questions, that's fine. Please contact me. Select performance measures that fit in your program design. And remember that less equals more. Focus on those small number of high quality performance measures as opposed to trying to measure as many as you possibly can. Measure outputs and outcomes for program beneficiaries, not members. There are only specific measures that allow that, and that's usually for a professional teaching corps that deals with. So more than likely, your program will not measure members. Clearly define all terms used in the outline in the performance measure instructions. So if it says economically disadvantaged, there is a specific definition that the Corporation for National Community Service says, in order for that to be met, and you have to include that when you're writing out your performance measures. Output should be larger than the outcomes. We mentioned that before. And use numerical targets. Do not use percentages. If you use percentages in there, it will be pulled, and you will have to redo them to make sure that it matches up a number. And lastly, choose outcome measures that are ambitious but realistic, and ensure that you can meet them within that particular program year. And just to wrap up everything, this is a technical application that requires a lot of reading and pre-planning. I cannot stress this anymore. Possibly you've got to start now if you have not done so. And I don't want to sound ominous, but it can take a good 40 solid hours to write. and then the actual research that you have to do, like we talked about before. I think Lisa mentioned the evidence-based and some of the other things that are in the application. You really have to be, well, you really have to be, okay, really have to be specific with what you're writing and what is being requested in the NOFO. Um, you can request technical assistance if you need it. We're happy to come on site. You're welcome here to come and talk to us or to have phone calls. We're happy to help as much as we possibly can. Like I said, start small with a plan to grow. You can start out with 5 members this year, and you can end up with 15 by year 3. So to contact us, we've listed all of our information. Lisa's number and email are up there along with mine. Renika Fair, who is our staff accountant, her information is up there as well. So if you've got any questions that are specific to your program design or anything that's in the NOFO or anything of that nature, any of the information that's on the website or anything that's budget related, we can answer those questions. I really do say reach out to Renika for those budget related questions especially. And then this last page here, I think Lisa mentioned the AmeriCorps Vista programs in Senior Corps. If you're interested in that, those programs are actually managed from the Birmingham CNCS office, and there is their contact information. You will reach out to, I think it's Lavera Butler and Patty Smith. And that's it. Are there any questions? If you have some, please go ahead and type them in the chat box and we'd be happy to answer. Okay. Well, since we don't have any questions, we greatly appreciate everyone calling in and participating in the call today. And again, if you need any assistance, we are here to help. Thank you.